This is Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash, a podcast about everything that happens after Git Push. Ship It is brought to you by Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Launch your apps close to your users all around the world. Learn how at Fly.io.
Hello and welcome to Ship It, the podcast all about everything that happens after Git Push. I'm your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash. How's it going, Autumn?
I'm kind of tired. How are you?
How many cups of coffee have you had?
Only one. I'm not working on the second one, okay? I'm working on it.
I don't think either you or I can complain about being tired right now because neither one of us were fixing blue screens from CrowdStrike. So,
ops hugs to the people that had to deal with that. Y'all are the real MVPs and just all the coffee and sanity.
And $10 gift cards.
Oof, that's all they're going to be able to afford after they pay for the SLA breach of contracts.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So this is our first recording after everything that happened with CrowdStrike. I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you know exactly what has happened, but we're going to go into it a little bit in the outro. As it's just a fun, what we've learned from it. Again, Autumn and I do not do Windows management. I used to manage endpoint computing at a university. And so we had, I think it was 3,000 or so, computers in classrooms, labs, laptops, all sorts of things. Majority of them were Windows. And so immediately when I saw this happen, I was just like, oh, I know what I would have to do in that situation. And in a lot of cases too, even at the university, we didn't have automation for a lot of this stuff. There was some group policy and there was Active Directory, but it wasn't available to me as the endpoint manager. That was the sysadmins for a long time. So anyway, we'll dive into it a little bit.
I think the crazy part is Windows is used by so many hospitals. You know what I mean? And so many of their devices, because of HIPAA and the different requirements, had to be taken physically into offices, and they had to deploy people to physically to those I think Seattle's Children's Hospital had to shut down all of their inpatient clinics. You know what I mean? That's wild.
Right. And this was 8.5 million devices, which the reporting that I saw said less than 1% of all Windows installs, according to Microsoft, and which is just a staggering number to think of. Wow, less than 1% is still a really big number.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of it was travel, hospitals, and banking.
There were some people that were still stuck in airports a week later.
Oh, well, I mean, Delta has canceled thousands and thousands of flights, and I can't believe the amount of things that people have had to go through to get this problem fixed. So we're going to go over a little bit.
I feel so bad. There was a guy on Twitter that was saying he was on day 3 or 4 of being stuck with Delta and had no hotel, no rent a car, and they were just sorry, we don't know when you're going to get out. And I'm just can you imagine? You only pack so many clothes. He has no access probably to his actual luggage,
Right. If you checked a bag.
Yeah. And he's just sitting in an airport and you only have so much paid time off. You only there's so much that goes into traveling. It's already such a stressful process.
Air tags and bags. I love it. To go find, I'm just going to go find my bag and get my clothes out of it.
I just got an image of you crawling through one of those luggage.
I always wanted to go on the little conveyor belts through the little, that'd be fun.
I just had a whole mental image of you, of your face, sticking out of one and a smile. It kind of made my day. I'm slightly more awake now.
Toy Story 2, right? They at the very end of Toy Story 2, the big chase, they go into one of the things. I remember as a kid, I wasn't really a little kid.
See, this just proves that Disney fumbled you. Okay, they fumbled. You just. Oh, they messed it up so bad. You were perfect for that company. They should have used you as a systems engineer and a cartoon inspiration because you are a big kid. Okay.
I knew almost nothing about Disney, the company, before joining Disney. And my wife always said I was the worst Disney employee because I knew nothing. She's well, what about this? And I learned a lot in 6 years working there, and I read books. What
do you mean you didn't know anything about Disney? How does one end up a big kid and not did you watch the movies and stuff?
I did some, but not. It wasn't like I mean, we had VHS, like one recording VHS of like a couple like shows, right? But it was just like straight off TV, right? We didn't buy the movies. I didn't have cable as a kid. I didn't have the Disney Channel. I didn't do all that stuff. So it was just like, oh no, I had whenever they showed the Sunday night Disney movie, like we would record one.
That was like my childhood was like based off of the Sunday night Disney movie. What do you mean?
But then again, like most of the stuff I played sports. I went outside. I lived in Southern California my whole life, but like I didn't go to Disneyland that much. Like we didn't have the money for Disneyland.
That was the only vacation I ever went on in my childhood. Like,
yeah, our vacations were like camping at the lake, right? Like we would go find a local lake or a river.
Ew, you went outside?
Oh, I was always outside.
That sounds horrible. I played with Disney princesses and stayed in the house.
But thinking of like back history wise of what Disney and historically what we did as kids, in today's show, we have Martin Jackson, who's going to talk to us about something that wasn't even that long ago.
It felt like it though. Like it felt like a super retro episode, which is just, it's really funny the way like that technology has evolved, especially when it comes to just infrastructure. Like I feel like we went through like warp speed the last 5 to 10 years of infrastructure.
The acceleration of infrastructure and application management in the last 10 years has been astronomical.
It's wild.
The things we're talking about here, because this is 2014, we'll get into it. We're deploying Puppet at Walmart to a bunch of stores from like no configuration management, just servers set up like with actual like checklists, right? Like literally Word docs.
Mainframe influenced configure, but that it's just wild. Like for one, who would have known that Walmart was such like an innovator in that space, and then it wasn't long enough. Like we were already out of high school, like we were already adults when this was happening. You know what I mean? Like this is not something that happened in the 80s. Like
in 2012, I think, is when I went to PuppetConf. I had PuppetConf in 2012, 2013. And so I was Puppet certified. I did all the training. I was going to the conferences and deep into it. So like, I'm pretty sure that like I was influenced by what Walmart was doing at the time, because I was looking at it in my little sysadmin area of like managing a couple hundred servers. I'm like, I don't want to do this SSH anymore. And then extrapolating that out to thousands, hundreds of thousands of servers at 5,000 stores or whatever, like that, it was just like I couldn't even imagine how that scaling would work. And we get into it in this talk. And so that was great.
So how we were talking about like the Netflix blog and people kind of sharing knowledge, and it's a little wild that they were doing such innovation, and you don't want to end up on the news for it going wrong, but it's also wild that they weren't almost like talking about their accomplishments more. Like nobody would have known.
They did in certain circles, right? Because that was like in the Puppet world. I knew about Walmart moving to Puppet.
But did you know the scale and the like, you know what I mean?
And some of the talks, yeah, for sure. But like I don't want to spoil the interview here, but like the fact that migration's still going on, right? 10 years later,
it's wild.
This is still happening. Like, because like the accomplishments of 10 years ago no longer look like accomplishments today. And so now if you're not going to AI and doing the cloud and doing Kubernetes, like you're just like, oh, get out of here, right? But like there's so much legacy.
I mean, I don't know, but look at how you turn around and like a lot of people are going from the cloud to on-prem. So like, is it though? You know what I mean? And yeah, everyone's doing AI, but until when? Until they rip it all out of things all over again. So it's like, I feel like as long as they're on this, like, depending on what side of that 10-year later, like, structure, like, we might all be going back to it. Like, I mean, there are whole startups that are very successful because they are allowing people to do on-prem and cloud and hybrid clouds, so.
And the foundations that were laid 10 plus years ago with things like configuration management and automation and just getting the organization ready to adopt that sort of massive changes and automating and trusting systems, that was foundational to everything we're doing today, right? There would be no Kubernetes if there was no Puppet.
And all this like leads into like how automated like infrastructure has gotten, how like we've got so good at mass like rollouts and deployments, and like just kind of the basis of, and that stuff's not going to change.
So let's not spoil the whole interview. Let's jump right into it with Martin, and we'll come back afterwards and talk about CrowdStrike.
With What's up, friends? I'm here with Kyle Carberry, CTO at Coder.com. So Kyle, I've known Coder as the IDE in the cloud, and over time, you've iterated to become a fully open source cloud development environment, a CDE. How do you explain what Coder is and what it does?
Coder is a platform to provision you a development environment on any cloud infrastructure. That might be in a VM, that might be inside of a container, but Coder is kind of a developer's route to provision infrastructure for them to write software inside of. We started with the IDE, which is kind of like putting VS Code in the browser, which is what most people are certainly familiar with us for. And we kind of funneled that into more of a platform where people provision the infrastructure. And a lot of people do use a web IDE with Coder. A lot of people use a local IDE and just connect in.
Okay, so what are teams coming to you for? Who's coming to you?
What people really come to us for, particularly this problem is really exacerbated if you're a large enterprise, is when you have like 500 engineers that are trying to update like a version of Python. And instead, we allow one engineer to go through that tedious work of updating some scripts or some Docker container. And then you can actually just deploy that in one click to say like 500 engineers and make it really, really simple.
Let's laser focus in on the platform engineer. It is that team's job to provide the best infrastructure, the best platform for their given applications, for their teams. What are some signs or signals for platform engineers to think about when it might be time to consider a cloud development environment like Coder.com?
So as a platform engineer, developers might constantly be opening like IT tickets that their computer isn't working properly. They might constantly want to update dependencies, but that's a big mess. You constantly have to email people across your team to say, hey, Adam, could we update from Java 17 to Java 18? Those are the kinds of problems that people typically have. That's the status quo. You ship people more powerful laptops to improve the build times of your projects. You try to reduce the complexity of your products instead of simply, leveraging better hardware. We believe that the future is leveraging the cloud for a lot of these things. You can get more powerful instances in GCP or AWS that can make the build times faster instantly. You can let one developer create a standardized environment and then distribute it to 1,000 so that when you're updating from Java 17 to 18, it's just a simple pull request. You can co-locate your servers right next to something like S3 or a database that you're using in development so that you get immediate data transfers and it's not slow. Many of our customers, which is a crazy thing to say, but they use absolutely massive monorepos and they get clones that go from like 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour to simply like a minute or 30 seconds. It's just a lot simpler when all of your engineers are standardized on one centralized piece of infrastructure and then one person can impact the lives of hundreds of engineers. And with that, we don't believe that everything belongs in the cloud. We think that some workloads are really amazing for it, and some are absolutely terrible. Coder should be a self-serve offering to your engineers. It should not be prescriptive, where you migrate all pieces of software development into the cloud. Only the things that really get a lot better by running them in this cloud-native way do we really promote moving.
Well, it might be time to consider a cloud development environment. And open source is awesome, and Coder is fully open source. You can go to Coder.com, get a demo, or try it right now, or even start a 30-day trial of Coder Enterprise. Once again, Coder.com, that's Coder.com, Coder.com.
Thank you so much, Martin Jackson, for joining us on the show today. Martin currently works at Red Hat, doing a lot of different automation and container stuff, but also what we kind of were talking about in the pre-show was some of your work you did at Walmart with configuration management, and I kind of want to dive into that first and see how it's going. But first, just tell us what were you responsible for at Walmart with configuration management, and what did that look like?
Yeah, sure. So at Walmart, I got into configuration management formally it was about 10 years ago. I had been a network engineer where I was responsible for maintaining Walmart's IPAM systems, IP address management, DNS, DHCP. And one of the things that I'd done in the IPAM space was to help write and then be responsible for the rewrite and redesign of our in-store IPAM system, which maintained multiple DNS zones, DHCP configurations with both pools and static configurations, and a introductory user interface that allowed, like field support and non-technical people to interact with the IP address management system would create DNS zones, entries for every store. There's a lot of complexity to it. And this was really the beginning of me being involved in configuration management, although I didn't know it at the time. After many years of doing this IP address management stuff, we were trying to do IPv6 and, IPv6 still hasn't happened. But I got a bit frustrated with that. And then I got the opportunity to move to infrastructure as a service team, which was just forming at the time. And so we evaluated a bunch of the leading solutions at the time. Chef was actually the incumbent because Walmart had just gotten, serious about e-commerce. And our e-commerce division was using Chef. They loved Chef. They just made a purchase of an organization called OneOps that was based on Chef, and they could also use Puppet, and Ansible wasn't really a thing yet. So we did a competitive evaluation of a bunch of these configuration management products. And, much to our surprise, open source Puppet won. So our initial configuration management deployment was open source Puppet using the Foreman as the node classifier and all of that stuff.
And for anyone not familiar, Foreman is a Red Hat product that does mostly provisioning, but it has that configuration component, right? It gives you all your data about machines, and then you can combine that metadata with a Puppet manifests and then deploy a complete system.
Yes. The Foreman is a pretty amazing thing in and of itself. It was a lot earlier in its life cycle. It's grown the ability to do an awful lot of interesting things. It's the basis of the Red Hat satellite product, in fact. So there's a lifecycle piece, there's a content, there's a lot of that stuff. I've always loved the Foreman, and that gets to be part of the Red Hat story. I'm sure we'll get to that in the conversation. Okay, so we were in the process of doing configuration management. We decided on Puppet as being our the solution that we were going to use, and so we got heavily into the prospect of writing content for it. We had a couple of really experienced systems engineers that wrote the bulk of our content for the initial deployment of what we were going to do. And I was responsible for designing what the head end was going to look like, what the Puppet services, how the Puppet services were going to be laid out, with the load balancing and, division of labor and all that stuff. So, there were a bunch of us, and then there were a couple of other store guys that were instrumental in helping get a bunch of that stuff deployed. The really exciting thing, there are projects like this that go on at companies like Walmart all the time. One of the real learning moments for me was when we were, talking about how excited we were about Puppet and showing it to applications teams and hey, wow, we can make changes across the entire environment in hours. And everyone was like, yeah, I mean, we've already got a dozen systems that can do that. Who cares? What do you mean you got a dozen systems you can do? Well, there's our main package distribution system, internal thing called Dust. There's, there are a whole bunch of proprietary products for it. What makes this different? And I did not have a really good answer for that at the time. We learned through brutal experience that along with the ability to do infrastructure as code comes a responsibility of doing those deployments in a conservative and safe manner. Because if you send a bad change to a lot of places very quickly, it can have a lot of consequences.
Hello, CrowdStrike.
Right. We are recording this after the CrowdStrike incident, which now even completely non-technical people, kind of understand as a bellwether as far as that goes. But for a lot of other reasons, it was very important that we improve on a lot of our situations. The way the internal Walmart architecture is laid out, every store is a data center into and of itself. And so there are a number of servers in each store. And in the US alone, Walmart has 5,000 stores. So, you've got somewhere between 4 and a dozen server images per store. That racks up the node count really quickly. And the ability to assert policy and to know for sure what configurations are across that entire estate was really powerful. It was a capability that our infrastructure leadership really wanted to be able to have.
Now, with that many stores and servers spread across that broad of an area, were you running as much as you could locally in the store? So disconnects, internet disconnects are fine, right? You're just we have to deploy the whole stack every time in every area, which is probably what percentage of overhead per store is just like the management side? Like you need to have foremen and Puppet servers and storage and all that stuff. If you have 4 racks in a store, what do you have, like half a rack is just overhead?
We only deployed what absolutely had to be deployed in the store at the store. Officially, the application addressable capacity was about half a rack per store. And then with all the necessary backup and other infrastructure, it winds up being about a rack and a half, 2 racks, give or take. Network gear, all the redundancy.
Yeah.
Deploying foremen inside a store would have been nuts. We technically would have had the capacity to do it, but one of the things that we were trying to do was to provide a centralized reporting capability of what the current state of everything was. One of the biggest things that we were able to deliver in terms of just showing people how widely certain kinds of configurations drifted was one of the early foreman capabilities of creating graphs based on Puppet facts. And so one of the facts that we had was kernel version. We created the graph of kernel version. We had like 200 kernel versions.
All of the kernels, yeah.
Yeah. Every single kernel that had been released.
It was out there.
Several PTF kernels, which were, what they called precision targeted fixed things for very specific problems that had occurred at just that store. And everyone's like, wow, that's really a problem. I would have thought it would have been a lot more consistent than that. Well, you would, but you don't, this isn't your day job. So, for your level of abstraction, it kind of is. But that was one of the things that we used to help show that there was value in configuration management at that scale.
Right. That amount of drift is just impossible to debug anything, right? Like once you say like, oh, store 873 has this weird issue with this one thing that's not responding. It's like, okay, well, how is it different than store 900, right? It's like, well, who knows?
Yes, that is exactly the problem that you run into. And, we were training people to get used to the idea of being able to rely on certain configurations being a certain way. And when you're in the thick of it, your first thing is, okay, check this, check this, check this, check this. If you're in the middle of a really serious issue, it could take you an hour to check all of the things that you need to check, just kind of in the back of your head for what the major problem could be. And until you know what the state of those things are, you can't sort of proceed to the next part of the troubleshooting tree.
What did the application layer look like here? Is this so like you have racks in stores and you're deploying and configuring Linux on top of it? Are application development, because like this is pre-containers, this is pre-Kubernetes stuff. Like, so you're probably just deploying, like an application developer creates an RPM, throws it in a repo, and then Puppet says, yum update somewhere, right? Is that the cycle? Are application developers doing any of the Puppet configuration too?
Oh, RPM would have been so much better than some of the actual things that we had to do.
Git push.
The store workflow was actually developed during the proprietary Unix era. The way that all of this happened was that there were a smorgasbord of potential commercial Unixes that were available for store deployments. And, did you know that NCR made a Unix once upon a time? Oh, buddy, yes, they did. It was called MP-RAS.
Everyone made Unix at a time. I'm sure like every company out there had a Unix flavor.
Yeah. Well, we had MP-RAS, we had HPUX, and we had AIX. And all of the basic store deployment systems were based on this. And so all of the tool chains were based on the idea that your application could be running on any of these 3 Unixes. Why 3, you may ask? Because Walmart is a retailer, and Walmart's differentiator for years and years and years and years was always price. And so, the way that you get prices down in a store is to say, you sell soap, who's going to have the lowest price point? You two work it out. And like, well, we'll buy this much. We'll buy, we'll sell you this much at this price. We'll sell you this much at this price. So Walmart had for years operated, the strategic vendor environment where vendors were expected to compete with each other on the basis of price. And this worked in technology too. So for the different Unix variants, they basically threw it out for quarter era bids. You're going to retrofit 200 stores this quarter. What's your bid for hardware and software? And whoever came in with the lowest bid was the one who won. So are we deploying HP this year? Are we deploying NP-RAS this year? Are we deploying AIX this year? Who knows? We didn't know. They didn't know. But all of our systems had to have the same basic capability. Now, years went by, and at this point of Walmart's history, it was solidly into virtualization. So it was all Xen and VMware at this point. So we didn't have the proprietary Unix component of all of this, but we did have a lot of the tooling that had existed from that era because, all the migrations and everything. So we had an internal build and packaging system that would compile the application code. Yes, compile, because a lot of these applications were 4GL, ESQLC, and yes, I kid you not, COBOL.
Oh, no.
Fun fact, we tried several times during my career at Walmart to enumerate the number of applications that were on an individual store server, and no one could agree on the definition of applications. So that answer ranged somewhere between 800 and 5,000. These were individual software artifacts that were deployed to this individual server image, and you had to deploy each artifact to every store in the chain. That was the way the architecture worked. Yes, it got wild.
What was the purpose of having servers per store? Like, instead of having it all in a centralized area, like why servers in the actual locations, and then running that many applications on those servers? Because it just seems like it would be very hard to onboard new people and to troubleshoot, and then to keep all those different servers updated if they're all running on different hardware. And
oh yeah, it was a full-time job for a lot of us, keeping all that stuff up to date, for sure. But the reason it was done that way was that the basic origins of this architecture go back to the old mainframe days of the 80s and satellite networking. When they had it all centralized on a single mainframe, they had massive scaling problems because Walmart went through this whole period where, it was the fastest growing company that anybody had ever seen anywhere. And, it went from being a minor regional retailer to a national retailer to the world's biggest retailer in the course of about 15 years. It's really kind of crazy how all of that worked out. But at the time, the first architecture was a batch mode thing where basically they would do local stuff. And then there was a modem that would dial the home office and everything would upload to the mainframe and they'd pull the stuff that they needed and they'd hang up. And then, someone got the idea, hey, if we got more information about what stores were selling in real time, we would be able to make better business decisions. Like, well, that would cost a lot because, it would require full-time networking and you can't do full-time networking. And then, the networking industry came along and said, oh, yes, we can. Watch us. So there were a whole series of full-time networking technologies that were deployed. We did ATM, we did frame relay, a whole bunch of those things. But a lot of those still had, some really serious availability limitations and crucially bandwidth limitations. So it wasn't until past the year 2000 where we could rely on having more than 56K of bandwidth. K, not megs, K. And that was the burst. You bursted to 56K. Your guaranteed committed information rate was 16K.
How do you get a whole store's worth of inventory and data on the size of a Walmart store with that low of that's wild.
You don't. That's why you put all the servers in the stores.
And that is why you put servers in stores. Because with the variability of the user experience for, what it would take to look that stuff up in real time, it's a lot easier to preload it and maintain it locally and then synchronize differences. There were a whole lot of internal Walmart protocols that were developed to, synchronize from the home office to the stores and from the stores to the home office in turn. That were differential protocols that would, understand and deal with this data rate limitation.
Were you still at Walmart when it got to the point where people were ready to re-architect that framework overall to try to make it more modernized? Because I feel like at some point some things got to give.
Yes.
Just when we do retro episodes, I think about all the things that we complain about now, and then it puts it into really good perspective. You were like, I wish I had RPMs, and I was like, oh goodness, there's something worse. So at some point, I'm sure.
I came to Red Hat because I love Red Hat technologies, but RPMs are cool when you understand them. It's just that RPM is very picky about who it allows it to understand.
How do you re-architect something so big in that way? Because the way that you're, explaining it, with it growing so fast and it being the first retailer to grow that fast, you're solving a problem that's never been solved. So how did you go about re-architecting that system to solve this new problem? That's a good problem, but
Yeah. Well, my move to what would become the configuration management team was a big part of that. We recognized that there were a whole lot of things that we needed to modernize. But because of the way that technology rollouts happen in a company that size, and with national reach and global reach in some cases, that's not something that you can change overnight. So you need to build an entirely new set of capabilities and introduce them gradually in such a way that the stores that are able to take advantage of them can, and you don't penalize the stores that can't take advantage of them yet. And that's never like a perfect transition plan, but you're kind of like Indiana Jones at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you got the bag of sand, like, yeah, it looks like you need an extra couple ounces. And, you put the bag of sand down and the boulder's coming, the boulder's coming, but you're just hoping that, you get an extra 4 or 5 seconds to get away from the boulder. But yes, that the basic strategy is that a lot of those applications keep running, but we have to add new capabilities underneath them and around them to make it easier to deal with. I kid you not, for many years, and it wouldn't surprise me if this is still very much a thing that happens because I haven't been there for a couple of years, but we always referred to the server images as tapes because for a long time they were literally tapes. If you needed to DR a store, it went to the tape drive. And, eventually physical tapes, went out when you had rotational media that could store several terabytes at a time. You didn't need tapes anymore, but we still called them tapes. Lots of people around Walmart still called logging into a server, dialing in. Oh yeah, I'm going to dial into 873. Dial in? What do you mean?
You literally dialing a phone number and making sure a computer picks up on the other side.
Yeah, that's what it was.
So I'm guessing for a long time you were maintaining two different architectures while you're moving stores over. Like, what was it like maintaining both of those, and how long did it go on? Because I feel like when you're trying to herd people over to like a new system, it's very hard.
All of my best information says that transition is still ongoing.
Yeah. Every large enterprise is in a stage of migration, and it doesn't matter what percentage.
I mean, I feel like it's constantly, but I mean, like, just to the systems that you were like, going from like the mainframe, like influenced architecture to like something more modern. Like, I'm sure that it's in a constant state of, migration, but like basically to what you were trying to migrate it. Like, did you ever get to a point where everything moved over, or do you think it was still moving for like...
No.
Wow.
I know for a fact that big chunks of the mainframe influenced architecture are still in place, and they plan to keep them in place for quite some time yet to go.
See, this is why I say legacy tech is going to be like just everyone's always like, don't you want to work in AI? And I'm like, I'm good. Like, it'll be fine.
Well, like legacy makes the money, right? Like, you can't, like, the new stuff, if you open a new store, you have a chance to redesign some things and say, hey, I need a bigger data center, or I need more cooling, or whatever it is for the new store. But you still have the other 5,000 stores that's like, well, what does it take to like make them look like this? Like, they're never going to, right? Those buildings exist, and you're not going to get larger AC units because the power grid can't handle it, right? Like, there's all these decisions that are outside of your control that you're just like, well, we have to live with the lowest common denominator, which goes right back to like application deployment, right? Like, if you had no packaging system, right? Because you had 3 different operating systems, you're just moving files, and you're hoping that a lot of those file formats are as portable as possible, or just like plain text, right?
Well, we made our own.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was tar based. I mean, okay, if you're allowed to hate one thing about RPM, that I will, as speaking as a Red Hat person, the fact that RPM was CPIO based is nutty. I don't get why they did that. I'm sure they believe that they had really good reasons for it at the time.
Red Hat needs to give you a raise. The way that you go so hard for Red Hat, I love it. Like,
I made a big decision 22 years into my career, and I'd better believe in it. Yes,
I love that.
Now, what did it look like as you're rolling out configuration management on all these stores, and you're saying, hey, we have this new system, we want you all to move to it, and you're trying to centralize some of that data? Like, obviously you have network connectivity, or you have things that are outside of your control of like, oh, this can't go faster because physics and speeds and everything. But what were the bottlenecks as you're rolling that out to say, like, the store can basically run the Puppet server there, but like, do you have like Puppet DB to connect? No. You're running.
We didn't run Puppet servers in stores. The Puppet server components were all centralized.
Oh, so they're all getting manifests from one location and then running them.
Yep.
Okay. I used to run Puppet at a couple of places, and scaling Puppet servers is not an easy thing, like because that's where the load is, right? Like they're doing the compilation of like what the server specs are and the manifest and everything, and it says like, oh, all the heavy lifting goes to the server instead of things like Ansible and Salt and stuff that put it on the clients essentially. And so what did that look like to be able to push that much data from that many locations into a centralized place that does all the heavy lifting?
That was one of the most exciting and fun things that I got to do from the years 2014 to 2016. Yeah, because the scaling of the head-end Puppet infrastructure was primarily my responsibility during that time. Part of the big story there is that in especially 2014, we had very aggressive infrastructure management that had a very high appetite for risk. And it was great. He was a little Sicilian guy. He always liked to talk like this, Love the guy. He's off in North Carolina doing consulting or something now, but he was a trip to work for. There was one day, and I tell this story in the PuppetConf 2015 keynote because this is the way it actually happened. He called us in August of 2014 after we deployed Puppet to like a few hundred servers, and this was a pretty big deal, Changes are automatically happening in some stores based on this. And, he's like, how are we going to make a difference for stores this year before lockdown? And lockdown means you have, through Halloween, basically, to get these deployments done. So we had, 2 months. Like, how many stores do you think we could get to? And I was in there. I went talked to a bunch of other senior engineers, and we came back and, like, how about 500? 500, does that sound good? 500 stores by October? No, 2,000. So we went back and forth a little bit in his office there. 2,000 got written on the board. I remember this very clearly.
2,000 stores in 2 months?
Yeah.
Wow.
It gets better. One of the guys said, well, crap, if we're going to do 2,000 stores, we might as well do all of them.
Oh, no.
And everybody just looked like, oh.
But why?
Yeah. Sicilian guy says, yes, I love it. That's the spirit.
Did he have a pager?
Oh, yeah.
Someone just in the back, do all of them.
Yeah. No, we all had pagers at that time. Senior leadership would go into the big war rooms with us.
How did you roll that out? Like the one time that I've shifted an entire infrastructure, like to start using configuration management, I literally used Ansible to go deploy Puppet. Right? Like I was just like, I have SSH access. Let me go install this agent, bootstrap it, and then just we're off to the races, right?
Luxury.
But did you test it on a few of them first, or did you actually like just roll them all out and just hoped for the best?
All right. So the way we did this, we enlisted a lot of help. Like there were, I don't know, 3, 4, or 5 of us full time on the configuration management team. We had a bunch of people from the stores team that were helping. We had a bunch of people from the DCs team, the distribution center team, because this was part of it too. We had a bunch of people from the home office team, which is where the data centers were. Our focus was on stores because, with that kind of timeline, we could not afford to lose any time. And the store process was important. Now, one of the things to understand about the Walmart architecture at the time is that there was a very well-established protocol for what you have to do when you deploy one application to every store. Everybody understood that process. People knew what to expect. And, there's a cadence. One store first, then 5, then 10, then 50, then 100, then groups of 500 until you're done.
So did you do this with no scheduled downtime, being that Walmart's some are 24 hours?
Oh, yeah. There was no need for downtime for any of this.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't schedule any.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, did you have a window, like if it all went wrong? Like, because this is the first time that you were doing it like on that scale. Oh, okay. So not at night?
Right. Nighttime is when all the important business critical, end of day functions and things like that happen.
That makes sense.
Yeah, cash wrap and, all those kinds of things. So like, it's really attractive to say, yeah, we'll do this at 1 a.m. Like, y'all want to impact our cash reconciliation?
Doesn't sound good.
No, we don't want to impact your cash reconciliation. No, so there were 2 aspects of this that made it work for us. The first was that first of all, we rolled out Puppet in enforcing mode everywhere, day one. Had to be. because you're not providing any kind of value and you've got no way of fixing anything if you find it broken. And the other thing was we made the Puppet catalog as minimal as we physically could. So Puppet managed itself. It managed M Collective. M Collective is an older system for, orchestrating a bunch of Puppet runs. Scaling the M Collective infrastructure is kind of a separate story, but it was something that we tried doing at the same time. Did not work very well. It was functional barely, but separate thing. So we were deploying Puppet, and the only thing that it was managing in full enforcing mode was NTP. So our goal was to get the Puppet catalog that manages NTP and Puppet itself onto every store server by lockdown.
So when you're doing this, you said that you pulled people from other teams. What was the prep for that? Like, did you have to then train those other teams to be able to help you with this? Or did you kind of just make it as easy as possible and tell them to press button? Like, what was the prep to get these other members that were not on? Because it sounded like you formed the configuration management. So you guys were making this up as you went along, And
we were absolutely making it up as we were going.
So how do you then, teach other departments to do this for this big rollout? What was your plan for if it went wrong? What was your, backup?
Well, when Cortez reached the New World, he burned his ships.
You were like, YOLO.
There wasn't much in the way of a backup plan. Like the simple thing would have been just to use one of the other mass orchestration systems we had to remove every last trace of Puppet from all the servers that it was on. That was pretty straightforward. And so we didn't put much more thought into it than that. But, getting these other people involved, like we had an incredible esprit de corps on the configuration management team. We very much believed that what we were doing was going to fundamentally change the way people interacted with systems. We saw the change that was happening in the world, and that everybody was in awe that Walmart was running as many servers as it was at the time. But Walmart was a huge outlier in terms of all that. These days, you can name any 10 groups that are running 100,000 servers. It's not that big of a deal anymore. For us at the time, it sure was. Now, it isn't. And, it was important to us to kind of be part of that hinge where everybody said, hey, maybe we can do this at this scale. Making people's lives easier, because all of us had spent a lot of time on pagers and, answering the 2 a.m. calls. I can't get an IP address. That was mostly the stuff that I did. And other guys were like, yeah, intermittent database slowness in the store. Oh, did I mention we were running 2 different Informix installations in most stores locally? Yeah. Tuning, raw spaces, the whole business, so all of these guys had spent most of their careers doing these 2-3 a.m. calls and saying, hey, we have a system that's going to make this easier for you and for everybody who follows. And if we get this done, we will be legendary. It was not hard to get people to sign on to that.
Yeah, for sure. Makes your life better.
So you made it? So you deployed all 5,000 stores in 2 months?
Yep.
These retro episodes are so cool because, for instance, WebMD, I didn't know what did they end up buying, or what were they supposed to be? I think they're supposed to be one of the biggest Walmarts of medical or something. Yeah, at whatever Rich said. And then who would have thought that Walmart was doing so many technological things before other people, and running that many servers. So it's just really cool. I would have never guessed that Walmart would be a revolutionary in technology, and they were out there doing it,
We were very happy to not be on the front page because of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to make news there.
Well, we didn't want to, it was something that we knew, and we could walk around and say, yeah, we know that we've done these things. And if you're interested in sort of the overall history of it, everything changed at Walmart the day that Amazon decided that it was going to be profitable.
That's interesting.
The day that Amazon decided it was going to be profitable, everybody said, okay, stop. We need to do something now. For years it was, oh, they sell books. Oh, they're never going to be profitable. Are they even in retail? And then Amazon decided it was going to be profitable, and a hush fell over, all of Bentonville, literally. And things changed. We need to approach certain problems differently than we have. And configuration management, the appetite for going through this potentially painful change was a big part of that. And, had the competitive threat not materialized, odds are good that Walmart would still be doing something much more like what it was doing versus what it is doing now.
One thing about this episode is it's like an unintentional retro episode, but also it's completely modern, right? Like this isn't something that happened in the 90s or before. Like this is, 2010, 14, 15 timeframe still happening today. Looking back at everything that you did and accomplished with that, what would you have done differently if you said like, oh, it not, at the same time, right? Like no new technology, there's no containers, nothing else, but like going back to that point in time, like, was there something that you're like, oh, you know what? If we could have done something either technically or just organizationally differently, what would that have been? It's a big question to put you on the spot for.
I've had an awful long time to think about all of this, and the adoption of Puppet and the usage of modern infrastructure as code systems. Like, we paved the way for a bunch of other modern orchestration systems. And more importantly, we gave the old architecture the bridge into the future that it needed to stay alive for as long as it needs to. And that's a big deal. There's a lot to say. The company needed that stuff to keep running. And if it hadn't been able to keep managing it, things would be very different. But the one thing that I wish we could have done better in those days was to prioritize and facilitate self-service for infrastructure as code, without a doubt.
Enable other people to, yeah.
Right. Because I love Puppet a lot. I have friends that work for Puppet. I have friends that used to work for Puppet. A few of my friends at Puppet are still there. Most of them have moved on since the acquisition. But one of the hardest things about adopting Puppet at scale is that if you use the centralized model, which we had to do because, one of the big strategies we were doing was unifying configuration management, not only across the stores, but between stores, distribution centers, and the home office environment, where, a lot of the conventions for arbitrary things in systems administration had just differed. So like when you set up a database, what do you name the logical volumes? Stuff like that. They had different naming conventions. You cannot bring those things together. But if you have common set of tooling that works, maybe everybody can participate in creating a new standard that everybody can use. That was kind of the vision. And that was one of the reasons that we did centralized Puppet the way we did. One of the main reasons that we did centralized Puppet the way we did. But the sort of Achilles heel of a centralized Puppet setup like that is that everything that happens in Puppet is based on this classification process, which is where the node sends in its facts, and then the Puppet server evaluates those facts and then decides which classes it's going to send down and effectively what the configuration is going to be. It is very difficult to make that a self-service process without knowing a lot about what Puppet is doing internally. You can add your own facts, but writing your own facts is a big deal. And that's one of the things that we never really got applications teams to sign on for was, I've got to write this Ruby code that I'm going to send to you. And then your servers are going to send that Ruby code to the store application servers, and you'll call us if there are problems. That's how this is going to work? Yeah. No,
that's a long chain of events.
It is. And a lot of other infrastructure as code systems are much better about facilitating self-service in that.
Well, Martin, this has been a blast, and it's not even a look back in history. It's just a look back in the last 5 to 10 years, right? Like this is just how things are for a lot of people still today. There's still a lot of infrastructure and organizations that are going through this type of migration and looking into it. So thank you so much for coming on and describing it to us. If people want to find you online, where's the best place?
Well, I have a Twitter account that I almost never post from that's Mjolnir40K. And LinkedIn, I suppose, is one of my main online presences. But I speak at a bunch of Red Hat events, and I'm usually at Automates or Summit or those kinds of things.
Cool. I'll put a link to some of those in the show notes. And thank you so much. This was great.
All right. Thank you very much.
What's up, friends? I'm here in the breaks with David Shu, founder and CEO of Retool. So, David, Retool has definitely cornered the market on internal tool software development. But zoom out for me. What's the big idea? Why did you start Retool? What is the big idea with internal software?
Yeah, so Retool started at this point 7 years ago. And when we started Retool, the core idea was that internal software is a giant category that no one really thinks about. And what's surprising to most people is that internal software represents something like 50 to 60% of all the code written in the world, which might sound pretty surprising. But if you think about it, most of us in Silicon Valley, we work at software companies, whether it's like a Airbnb, a Google, a Meta. These are all companies that are software companies selling software. And so most engineers in these companies are working on external facing software. But if you think about it, most software engineers in the world actually don't work at these software companies. There's not that many of them. There's maybe 10, 20 of them, big ones at least. Most of the companies in the world are actually non-software companies. So if you think about a company like an LVMH, for example, or like a Coca-Cola, for example, or like a Zara. Zara is not selling any software, but they actually have a lot of software engineers, actually. And all their software engineers, all they do day in and day out is basically build internal software. So that's, I think, one reason we started Retool. The second reason we started Retool is if you look at all this internal software that people are building, it is remarkably similar. So if you take a look at, like a Zara, for example, versus Coca-Cola, two very different companies, obviously. One a clothing company, one a beverage company. But if you actually look at the software they're building internally to go run their operations, it is remarkably similar. It's basically forms, buttons, tables, all these sort of pretty common building blocks, basically, that come together in different ways. But then if you think about, not just the UI, but also what's the logic behind a lot of this stuff, they're pretty much just hitting API endpoints, hitting databases. You care about authentication, you care about authorization. These are sort of a lot of common building blocks, if you will, to internal tools. And so for us, the insight was, wow, internal software is a ginormous category, and it's all so similar, and developers hate building it. And so could we create a sort of higher level framework, if you will, for building all this software? And that would be really cool.
That would be really cool. Okay. So listeners, Retool is built for everyone, built for enterprise, built for scale, built for developers, and that's you. And if you found yourself nodding your head to what David was saying, then check out Retool at retool.com/changelog. It's the fastest way to build internal software. Do yourself a favor, get a demo or start for free today. Again, retool.com/changelog.
Thank you so much, Martin, for coming on the show and talking to us about what it was like for you at Walmart deploying at this scale and making these foundational changes in a very diverse infrastructure. It was awesome. And also a little bit scary for me to remember some of the things that I went through. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have maybe a similar story. If you do have a similar story and would like to share how you went through organizational change at a large scale like this, whether it was configuration management or just like CI/CD, please email us. We'd love to hear from you. Ship it at changelog.com and let us know. Let us know who you'd want to talk to, what topics we want.
Also, I really love the vibe of the retro episodes. I feel like it I don't know. I love the fact that so much of what we did before is still so relevant.
And having the time to look back longer term, right? You're disconnected from the problem. You've thought about it and you thought about all the things you did right and some of the things you did wrong. And you can just say like, actually, we did the best we could, right? With the knowledge we had and the tools we had, that was all we could do. But if someone else is going through something similar, and a lot of these problems look similar now, you can kind of say like, actually, I wish we would have done one thing different. And self-service, as he mentioned, is one of those things. And I think that's where things like containerization has helped, and things like serverless and Lambda has helped, because that just made the application developer responsible for more things, but just enabled them to solve their own problems too.
It also gives them enough of a layer into a little bit less, I don't know. Like sometimes you need to know a little bit more of what you're doing because it helps you to be able to solve problems and see where those things intersect. Like we want to abstract problems away, but you don't want to abstract them so much that people don't have an understanding of what they're building either.
Yeah, the layer below is sometimes important. And
yes,
I went through multiple companies where we tried to make self-service configuration management for application developers a thing, and it was always the wrong layer. Like, because it was not an application development tool.
Because you don't want to give, like, sometimes developers are all like, I want control of everything. And we're like, bro, you don't need that. Like, so, and then sometimes we're like, but we need you to not just do hood rat things on the top layer because you don't understand the bottom layer. Yeah. We need you to like, there's got to be a middle ground because
the impacts of the things you do on top can definitely cause a problem below. So, yeah.
And you can't really fix something if you don't understand at least a few layers down.
So let's talk about CrowdStrike. Leading right into that.
When it goes wrong. No, but honestly, like, as much as like this is not the right way to do something, I deeply feel for the fact of like, can you imagine the panic that you would feel if you took down airports, hospitals? Like, we know that something went wrong and there should have probably been more testing, and you can throw all the shade that we want to throw, but like at the same time, like.
So I know, and if you're sick of listening to CrowdStrike reviews from people that weren't actually involved, feel free to skip this part. This is just stuff that we've learned reading a couple different things. And the main places that I'm pulling information from are the CrowdStrike executive summary from their post-incident review, and Pragmatic Engineer did a great like write-up of just like top to bottom, like where is this happening, what happened here, and where did it go wrong. But there's a couple other like reviews and podcasts and things that I've listened to that were also in this realm. But the main thing you're talking about, like there should have been more testing. In the executive summary, they say what they're doing to make sure this doesn't happen again was they say that they're enhanced software testing procedures. And they say, quote, improve rapid response content testing by using testing types such as local developer. That's not a thing you should be like relying on. They wrote the code.
I'm a little scared that Justin's face said like we knew it was going wrong. Y'all can't see it, but I knew like it was going wrong when he like, okay, he has this Justin shade face that y'all don't get to see, right? And like right before he's about to throw it, like he and like I'm just like so excited, and I'm just like, oh, it's coming. Like
I read local developer, and I'm like, okay, first of all, they're not talking to a developer. This is executive summary, okay, but like local developer is not your testing framework for how these things, like they wrote the bad code. Don't rely. They could change the tests to pass, right? Like do not rely on them to do this. But the other things they say is content update and rollback, which again, if you crash the entire system, there's no such thing as a rollback. That does not exist anymore.
That's the part that just like, it's almost like they don't understand what happened. And I know the engineers and everyone else understand, but when you read that, it's like so tone deaf that you're just like, bro, like, did you talk to the people with the technical background before you wrote this?
And this is not a technical person that wrote this. This is a legal team that is trying to limit the blast radius of what they're like. We're going to make improvements.
Yes, but to gain trust of your customers wanting to use your product going forward, you should have discussed this with your technical team, because now like you've already had this huge incident, right? And people are already like, well, do I trust you to roll out these updates? And then you release an executive summary that just this does not say I'm earning trust for your business going forward.
Well, and I'll get to that last part. So like this is just the testing improvements, right? And they have stress, fuzzing, fault injection, stability. What does stability mean? And content interface testing. I'm like, none of those things would catch this thing.
Yeah, none of that addressed a configuration problem.
Right, because this was not a business logic, quote unquote, business logic change.
It's not a code change. Yeah, like
which usually roll out differently.
That's but what I'm saying is like, if you were a CrowdStrike customer, right? Does this now make you feel any more trusting of them as a company if you read something that they're like, we're going to make all these changes that would not have made this any better? You know what I mean? Like it's why did you say it? Just you could have just.
One of the other things they say here in the executive summary is like the other enhancement is going to be adopting a staggered deployment strategy, which means they did not have one, right? Like this was a push go everywhere. And they even say in the reporting, right? Like if you were online during this hour and a half that this bad config was out there, your machine went down. Like you pulled this update, you went down. And even in here, they say that they're going to provide customers with control over delivery, like when they take those deliveries, right? Because before, if you were online and you connected to the server, you got the thing. I remember managing Symantec, like Norton from 15 years ago. And there was I could centrally tell all my machines, like only update during these times. And the fact that this system didn't have that is very surprising.
Windows Office asks you if they want to update it. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? Like,
I would absolutely argue that Excel is more important than your antivirus for your company to do their work. And also, I would not be surprised at all if Excel had kernel hooks, right? At the kernel level where they're like, this function, if you're calling that like equals column, whatever, like there's probably some kernel hook in there somewhere.
okay, we've just discussed that infrastructure has come so far. How we deploy things have come so far. Bro, you didn't have staggered deployments? Like, at the same time, I feel like bad for throwing shade at anything because this job is hard and there's always an edge case. But like, don't shoot yourself in the foot and have bad processes to make it harder. Like, even with good processes, there's edge cases.
And the process isn't always uniform for everything, right? Because like, if this didn't have kernel hooks and wouldn't blue screen the computer, like, okay, if the CrowdStrike agent failed, not a big deal, right? Like, okay, we can reboot it, right? Like you can reboot the system and things will come back online. The fact that this was parsing config at the kernel level and that did an out of bounds memory execution was like Windows did what it's supposed to do. And it said, hey, someone's trying to do something in memory that they're not supposed to do at this level. I have to go down. And that is what actually brought the system down. But if this is not running in the kernel, then okay, cool. Like program crashed. Okay.
That's kind of interesting too, though, because a lot of different articles are debating whether that makes it partially a Windows Microsoft problem and if they're partially to blame. But like you said, in a way, they did what they should be doing. You know what I mean? In one way of thinking. So it's like, is this just CrowdStrike or does Windows take some of the responsibility because technically Windows brought it down? But I mean, they were also...
Well, Windows was protecting Windows, right? But
that's what I'm saying. Like that was technically like an expected behavior that it should have been doing. You know what I mean? So it's like that debate on like responsibility and like where does it go forward with like SLAs.
And I love that the overview here from Pragmatic Engineer points to regulation as a problem, because regulation is why these things still run in the kernel. And I remember I was at the university when we switched from XP to Vista, and during Vista timeframe, Microsoft was getting into we're going to do antivirus, and they had like Windows Defender and all these things coming out. And at beginning, when Vista was codenamed Longhorn, other antivirus systems couldn't connect into the kernel because Windows walled it off. It said, you don't get kernel access. Only we get kernel access for our Windows Defender. And so there was literally lawsuits that said, hey, you're going to kill our business if you have hooks that we don't have.
This is also another one of those things of like, talk to the technical people before you make regulations, and before you make business decisions. Like, that's why it's really important to have those middle people who talk both languages, like your product managers or your project managers, and to have somebody like do all that, because you need to bring the business and stakeholders and lawyers and the technical people together to make sure we're like looking at all the different sides when making these decisions,
Yeah. And the decision they could have made was, okay, Windows Defender doesn't get kernel access either, so no one gets kernel access. But that's not the decision they made. They made the decision that Windows Defender needs kernel access, so everybody gets kernel access. And
which is like going the opposite direction and not a good idea either.
Well, I mean, at the time too, we're looking back to, early 2000s, like that was not an uncommon thing because there was less clear defined lines between user space and kernel. It's like, well, like a lot of things run in the kernel that shouldn't. The other interesting thing that Brendan Gregg, who's over at IBM now, he had really great insights into like eBPF as the enhanced Berkeley packet filtering as a system would have made this safe. And eBPF runs at kernel space, but makes the code safe so it can't crash the kernel if the eBPF program goes down, which I thought was interesting because a lot of antivirus companies, especially for like the Linux world, are moving to eBPF, and Microsoft in Windows is getting eBPF support at the kernel level. And so eBPF is going to be your one program to write for the kernel space, and it works on Linux and Windows. And it's also safe, where you get a little more elevated privileges to do things at a lower level without making the whole system crash.
That's interesting. I feel like that will be used in a lot of design reviews on a reason to use that going forward. They'll be citing that. My favorite part of all of this, though, is that in the programmatic programmer, he talks about two extremes in shipping to production. It says YOLOs and then like verification, and like, it's so funny. It's like the best little cartoon. We should put the link.
Yeah, we'll have the links to the show notes here. I just pulled up Brendan's blog too, because I thought it was really interesting as someone, he's been doing eBPF for a very long time when he was at Netflix and beyond that. And so seeing these things shift to safer ways to run on the system and still get you some of that low level access is also another mitigation you could do, instead of saying like, we also need to, things that run in the kernel should be rolled out slowly, right?
I think that's like the kind of like the thing between security and, you know, usability. Like you always want to make something secure, but you also want to make it usable. And you're constantly in that battle between how do we make it secure and also how do we make it where we're not making it so secure it's unusable. So it's like you're always a win.
The Venn diagram of secure and usable are just two separate circles, right? There's no overlap there. Right?
That's what I'm saying. So something like this with this product that is giving you like, that just seems like it's going to be like a huge win, because if it's going to separate it in that manner and then stop you from ending up going into kernel panic, like why wouldn't you include that?
And I feel like the antivirus companies have had more than decades, like literally 2 decades of training users that you want your antivirus definitions as fast as possible. Because people like me live through worms and things that would spread through networks really fast, and we could not get definitions fast enough. And we say like, hey, actually, if my antivirus would have been up to date, this could have been prevented. And as those 0 days and things spread quickly, right? There's a globally connected network, those things spread fast and you need to get those definitions. But what's the balance there between like, is this safe to roll out, or is this something that I need to protect myself with? And that is a really hard problem to solve.
I don't even know if that's just antivirus. So that's like open source in a lot of places. Like we're constantly wanting to like hurry up and fix things, but then you want to make sure that they're well tested. And then, you know, like you don't want to panic people. Like it just seems like it's always a cycle of software in general.
Yeah, and a lot of that's, you know, people moving from frameworks, right? It's like a lot of work, and they're like, oh, this is going to fix a bunch of bugs for me, or this is going to solve some security vulnerabilities or whatever. Like, when do I have time to do that sort of maintenance? And that is stuff that you outsource to someone else a lot of times. And you say like, oh, my security vendor pushes those updates to me. But
it's crazy because I feel like the farther they automate security, there's more false positives, and then people just ignore it. You know, like we have to do some sort of automation, because if not, like no one's going to sit there and just watch that all day. But people just keep like, it was so funny. Like I've seen people use a security product, I won't mention any names, and have been in like a conference and they're selling these huge security things, and they're like, oh, you should do this and it's going to be great. And then they're like, what do we do with all these false positives? And then you don't want to get to the point where you're constantly ignoring your security stuff because it's giving you all these false positives. So it's like,
and I absolutely have no problem throwing shade, because I know that like Google and Microsoft both are like, AI is going to solve that problem for you. And I am so like, oh my gosh, like you don't.
I love when you throw shade for me so I don't have to do it. Like, I'm always like trying to like not do these things, and Justin's like, let me help you.
You could be thinking of someone else, I don't know, but those are the two that came to my mind as like, oh, they went all in on this like new technology that no one understands is going to solve the problem that we all know very well.
Not just that, but like how much compute power, and like you're throwing so much at like a DOS attack when that is not the big picture. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're solving a very small section, but if you give so many like false positives and you're selling this as like this security suite, but it's only solving like one like small, I don't know. It just seems like it's very short-sighted. We're spending a lot of money and a lot of compute power and a lot of energy and making a lot of promises with AI when we're making a product less trusted. And then when they don't trust it, they're not going to actually pay attention to your warning. So I don't know.
And that like goes right along with these AI claims, and Google and Microsoft both are no longer claiming to be carbon neutral.
Did you see the new report that Microsoft made? It hurt my soul a little bit. Like they basically said if you just ran a ton of servers and laptops for years, we'd equate like a couple days of what they're using right now, and I'm just like, how did we go from so concerned to like YOLO? Like we live on the same planet, y'all. Like now, like we've all been talking crap about Texas's energy grids. Now they're like, we may like totally take down the like Western like US's energy grids with data centers, and they're just like, but it's fine though. Like, and there was a paper about Google's new search, which is, by the way, not as good. You know what I mean? Like, we're not getting a better product.
I switched to DuckDuckGo.
Oh, gosh.
I literally switched to DuckDuckGo because I don't want to contribute to AI generating anything for me that I'm not explicitly asking for and causing more stuff. DuckDuckGo has actually been really great. They have a setting in there. It's like no ads. Like just, don't show me ads. It's amazing. Also,
you get a lot of searches that you don't get on Google, which is like wild because I feel like before, like DuckDuckGo was kind of had a rep for other things, you know? And all of a sudden it's like, I'm getting better searches on DuckDuckGo. And I don't understand, like, at what point, like, are we going to start to make logical sense? You're using so much more power for a less accurate search. Like we don't want to use it. Like nobody asked for this. It's not as good. And you're like, let's like light the earth on fire. Like, and like y'all, like we're going to have AI and no electricity, like no power and no water. And like, and then what are we going to do? Like, why?
I stopped using Bitcoin when I saw the energy usage of the Bitcoin networks and just cryptocurrency in general. And then AI came along and was like, hold my beer.
Dude. Right? And people were like going in on like Bitcoin, which like, you know, justifiable. But like then we came up with something worse and they were like, it's going to be great. And it still doesn't do anything for us. Like the mom and me, like during COVID, I wanted to sit all the adults down and make them listen to Daniel Tiger and Elmo so they could be nice to each other. I just want to be like, did y'all watch WALL-E? Did you like, do we need to watch, like, what's that one movie? The Lorax? Like, like, y'all, like, I want to be able to, like, exist and, like, my kids to have somewhere to, like, just, what are we doing? Like, we're not even getting a good product. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, like as a product standpoint, yeah, absolutely. Like it's not solving my problems, right? Yeah.
Like it's not even good capitalism. Like, but wait, like let's just take the like warm and fuzzies out. It's not even like it's not. How does this become profitable? And it's a crappy product, and like you're spending more money. Like what? Like so confused.
I just enjoy that this episode was bookended by talking about cartoons. In both different contexts.
I'm just saying, okay, tell me, in the last like 5 years, have you not wanted to sit an adult down and like teach them the rules that we teach 5-year-olds on like how to treat others, how you want to be treated? Like they all need to watch Daniel Tiger and Elmo, and we need to fix them because the way grown adults treat each other, you're like, dude, we tell our children to like share and act better, and they'll be like, okay, you have 2 kids. Have you ever been out somewhere and you see an adult acting a whole fool and you have to explain to your children, like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, bro, you're like 40. Like, are you, like, I'm going to have to use you as a life lessons now. Thank you. Like, I'm just like, and then we're just like, we were all like, we're going to do better for climate change. Like we literally this year, we've had some of the hottest days on record. And we're like, YOLO, it's going to be fine.
And that's the problem of climate change was a thing that everyone jumped onto when it made money for the business, right? When you could say I'm carbon neutral, so it makes me money. But when something else that's not carbon neutral comes around and raises your stock price more, then all the DEI went out the window when it was no longer the thing to do, right? Like when a bunch of people forgot that it was important.
They basically said YOLO to all warm and fuzzy things. But the thing is like, let's go back. Let's talk about the capitalistic way that these things like, cause that's the part that pisses me off, right? Like as a Black woman, people will be like, oh, but DEI just makes you feel good. No, sir. Like return on investment. Like the fact that you make better software, these are data backed things, right? Like carbon neutral, you can say that in a warm and fuzzy, we're going to save the environment, but the less compute power you use, the more money your like organization saves. Like there are capitalistic reasons that these are good things that have nothing to do with just feeling good about them. Like they're better for business. And now you're getting a product and you are spending more money. Like, and you're going to make crappy soft. Like what? Like being bad capitalist, this is not good. Like it's not even good being a bad person. Like I don't get it.
Well, we're far off the beaten path of talking about CrowdStrike now, but this
hey,
is
we
fun
talked
ranting.
about cartoons twice.
Yeah.
Okay, this is very Autumn and Justin. Like
Very good episode.
we are very on the beaten path for us.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
1. Thanks for listening to Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Head to shipit.show for all the ways, or just search for Ship It wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find us. Thanks once again to our partners at Fly.io, to the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder for these dope beats, and to Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG when you sign up and save $100 off their team plan. That's all for now, but come back next week when we continue discussing everything that happens after Git Push.